This is Angel Insights, the show that delves inside the world of angel investing to discover their tips, tactics, and strategies from some of the world's leading angel investors. And joining me today is Edward Lando. Edward is an active angel investor and the founder of Horizons, the coding bootcamp that teaches you to code real products before you graduate. And Edward must be considered one of the youngest angels in the world, being only 23 years old, giving him a unique insight and perspective into the current market. In today's episode, we discuss the pros and cons of having an operator background as an investor, what metrics early stage investors should be honing in on, and the commonalities of successful consumer products. And for the accompanying article of today's show, head on over to SyndicateRoom.com, where you can find our entire investor academy with a range of articles from previous episodes. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on the show, so reach out to us on Twitter at SyndicateRoom. But for now, it's time to introduce the main man. So without further ado, I welcome my good buddy, Edward Lando, angel investor and founder at Horizons. Welcome to Angel Insights. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Harry.
I'd love to kick off today by hearing how you made your way into the wonderful world of angel investing and tech startups. What was the impetus for you entering the industry?
Well, for angel investing, I realized that I just spent a lot of my time meeting up with interesting founders, and that actually I knew a lot, and that I also reached out to anyone who was doing something cool, and sort of at the beginning didn't realize that it could be a job, but then sort of it started dawning upon me, and my friends and even my parents told me, you spend a lot of your time doing this, why don't you also invest on top of working on your startup?
Mm-hmm. And so was it for you then the value add that you could provide, or was it their financial motivations? What was it?
I would say, I definitely think that it was partly the value add, and also partly from a selfish point of view. I'm just very, very curious about a bunch of different ideas. Mm-hmm. And as you know, when you're working on a startup, you have to be 100% focused on that one idea. So this is sort of a way, especially if you get in early, to unofficially be there at the starting moments of a bunch of different companies and not only one. So it's a way to satisfy that curiosity and to be in the trenches with a bunch of different entrepreneurs who end up becoming very good friends, who I respect a lot, and to sort of like suffer through it with them and hustle with them.
I have to ask then, as a startup founder myself, and knowing, as you said, the 100% that it takes to go in, do you find it difficult then to disperse your time between your investments and your own startup Horizons?
I do a little bit. I think that's one of my many weaknesses. It's that I'm a little bit stretched thin because if you're curious, you can sort of start accepting sort of coffee meetings with everyone and being curious about everything, wanting to do it all. While at the same time, startups require sort of this hyper focus. So it's definitely very difficult, and you have to be sort of very disciplined about allocating certain percentage of your time to talking to companies and founders, and another percentage to doing your own work and sort of reserving the meat of the day, let's say, for your startup. Mm-hmm. and then in the periphery, doing your secondary job.
What would you say then is you said about time allocation there. What's your time allocation to kind of deal sourcing and then helping with the investments that you've made already?
Ideally, it would be something like 80-20, 80% on my own startup and 20% of my time talking to founders and talking to the founders that I work with and talking to new founders. Mm-hmm. Although the investments that I've made, I end up talking to them every day almost. They become very good friends. So that's not even work anymore.
And do you find that a problem ever, blurring the lines of investor and friendship, or do you think that can actually be a good thing?
For now, it hasn't been. I actually really love it. We were... my friend and I were working out with one of the founders that I just invested in over the weekend. It was great. So I think that's part of the benefit of being a 23-year-old angel investor and founder. Mm-hmm. It's that you as long as you don't sort of like go overboard and blur the lines too much, it's sort of a very good relationship to have as sort of a friend of the founder and not sort of this guy in a suit who's sort of pressuring you and who doesn't have any empathy for what you're doing.
And as you said there, 23, angel investing, it is unique. So what are the other benefits other than being different from the kind of blazer-wearing golf buddy investor that, is the stereotype investor?
I think that one of the main benefits, I thought, I wondered whether there would be sort of a credibility problem because, it's like, who the hell are you, 23-year-old person, to ask me, and sometimes, sort of an experienced entrepreneur, all sorts of questions. Sometimes they have much more experience than you, and they've actually been more successful than you in the past. So I wondered, would there be a credibility problem? But I think that as long as you show that you're sort of very curious about what they're doing, you ask good questions, you're respectful of their time, it's actually a very good situation to be in, because a lot of people find it refreshing, and you end up being able to give more of yourself, give more of your time, because you don't have, I suppose, as much of a commitment to other things as some of the other investors. You're still out there to prove yourself. You're still an entrepreneur, even as an investor.
In terms of interacting with VCs and providing follow-on funding for your investments, which will come in, say, 12 months if you started investing 3 months ago, just on average. How are you anticipating that interaction with VCs? Do you think there will be any difficulty?
So far, they've been incredibly friendly, and I think that part of being, the good VCs at least, I think their approach towards entrepreneurs is perhaps the same approach towards angel investors that they might work with, which is that as long as someone has the right attitude, works hard, is smart, and is a good person and a trustworthy person, who's also grateful for the help that they receive, that they're very open to helping, and they're very inclusive. So that's been great.
And are you actively looking to interact with VCs with the deliberate intention of being able to utilize their connections in the future for follow-on funding?
Absolutely. I think that part of being an investor is finding other investors who you really get along with and respect, and whose opinion you trust in. So I think that building that up as someone who's just starting off is definitely one of the main priorities.
Are there any investors that kind of hold true that you most respect and admire in the industry?
Some that I know, Charlie, we were talking about it from Brooklyn Bridge VC, has been incredibly helpful. There's also Ryan from Bassett Investors, who's been very kind as well. In terms of people who I don't know yet, but who I think are incredible, of course, there's Chris Sacca, who just seems to be an incredible hustler.
What a legend.
Right, I sort of followed his story from the outside. It's quite incredible how he got into some of these deals. So look forward to hopefully meeting him at some point.
And I'd love to kind of talk about your strategy now when it comes to investing and dive a little deeper. So what do you really look for as an investor? What gets you excited in a product or a startup?
Maybe my approach will change, but at least for now, especially at the earliest stage, almost to some extent as a co-founding investor, what I look for is just people who have some sort of special trait about them, who are particularly perseverant, huge aspirations, but also sort of like very real and grounded in terms of their work ethic, and sort of there's some people, I'm sure you feel this when you talk to them, you get a good vibe from them, and others you don't. And so I need to get a good vibe from them, and I just like people who are tremendously ambitious, who work very hard, who are smart, and ideally who have a very good reason of working on what they're working on.
And in terms of getting a good vibe with them, how long does that traditionally take? Obviously, you don't have like a 3 month, 6 month window, but will you invest after 2 or 3 meetings, or will it take 10 or 12?
Oh yeah, definitely. And especially as one of the main criticisms that you hear about investors sometimes is that they just suck up all your time, right? And that they're not respectful of the fact that you have to get other things done. So part of the difficulty and part of the challenge is sort of making your mind up over a few meetings. And sometimes there's some of these investments that I've made where I didn't meet the founder in person before doing it. I try to have a video call at least, because that adds a lot more context. In an ideal world, I'd love to meet with them in person but sometimes it's there's sort of it's particularly time sensitive, and you have to make your mind up with only 2 to 3 Skype calls.
And in terms of the deal itself, do you have kind of a preferred investment range, and how much equity do you look for in the company?
So far, I've been writing small checks, like 25 to 50,000, and it's been mostly quite early on. So I guess for better or for worse, sort of seed stage valuations are around 4 or 5 million these days. So that gives you around 1% of the company.
Absolutely. Okay. And as that early stage angel, then do you hone in on any certain metrics other than getting on with the founder and loving the product? Are there anything that determines whether you'll invest in the product? Do you really hone in on traction?
Right. Well, actually, we mentioned Chris Sacca. There's one thing that I very much like that he says, which is he says that he sort of only plays rigged games, and that he likes to essentially invest in something that is already doing well, and sort of help it do incredibly well, versus some people who think that they might be able to invest in something that's not doing well at all, but help turn it around. So I think that, of course, selfishly, because it gives you more information, being able to invest in something, in a company that already has some good revenue and growing revenue or some good traction is a huge plus. And I think part of that as well, sort of having more information, is also looking for situations where founders have certain unfair advantages, either through, let's say, their previous job, if they spent 5-6 years in the industry and know everyone, and that's going to be their sales approach, sort of hit up their old contacts, and that's how they've been growing so far. They have sort of a very, very good idea about how to scale, and some relationships that other people don't have. That's always incredibly helpful.
Now, I'm sure you've heard this before, and I'd love to hear what you think on it. And it's, a lot of investors with many years' experience, your Josh Koppelmans, Naval Ravikants, have said that the first, I think one even said the first 30 angel investments you make will not pan out. I mean, does that concern you as an angel in your first year angel investing? Do you think about it? Do you agree with it? What's your take on it?
I hope that won't be the case. I always wonder whether my startup will end up funding my angel investments, or my angel investments will end up funding my startup. What I like about that statement, and I've sort of followed Naval Ravikant and sort of his podcast and stuff like that, very much like what he says, is that there's a lot of modesty. And I think that some of the less good investors think that they're able to tell so early on, right? They know something about the industry, or they sort of try to approach it with this sort of very sophisticated thesis that they made up, versus I think that some of the better investors are more humble and realize that they actually know a lot less, for sure. And so they realize that when you do end up writing that check, you're most likely kissing that money goodbye, and you're lucky if you see it ever again.
And you mentioned there your startup and which will fund which. Firstly, where are you leaning now? What one do you think will fund which?
I don't know. I think that both will end up doing well.
Okay, and let's discuss then the nitty gritty of your startup and running your startup alongside angel investing. Do you think it helps having a hand in both operational and investing worlds at the same time? It's quite a rarity.
It is, especially I think very lucky to be able to do that at 23. I actually love it. I think that first of all, from a sort of approach strategy point of view, thinking about your startup as an investor. And then thinking about your investments as an entrepreneur is quite helpful. It gives you sort of different insights. There's always a power dynamic, I think, for young founders, where they wonder how to pitch their thing to VCs, and then actually if it's doing incredibly well, suddenly the power is in their hands, and VCs sort of all come knocking at their door. I think this sort of removes that power imbalance to some extent. And actually, I was telling you about this before the podcast. For Horizons, we're not even planning on raising money at the moment, and we realize that we don't necessarily need it. So I definitely like being in both worlds. I also think that it's particularly sort of satisfying. And especially for, if you're interested in a bunch of different ideas but can't do all of them as a founder. And
the bootstrapping thesis is an interesting one. So how do you identify between a business that is bootstrappable, if that is a word, and one that's VC fundable? Because all businesses, in the end of the day, Horizons, your startup, could accelerate much greater with a 20 million Series A, naturally, than if it was
right.
So what makes you think something's available to be bootstrapped compared to not?
I think that, even Horizons at some point, maybe we'd love to raise money as Series A or Series B, but at least when we're doing well, I think that some businesses just obviously make good money from day one, and others have to delay that, to create sort of a great consumer product or service that people won't necessarily pay for upfront, but will pay for at some point. So I think that it just all depends on what you're selling.
And what do you think your operations experience then has taught you, and you've applied directly to your investing strategy?
I think that, one thing which is like a human psychological thing, is that I do believe that everyone has imposter syndrome. So when you look at companies from the outside, when you look at people and investors from the outside, you always, to some extent, feel that they have their things much more together than you do. And then suddenly, as an investor, you start getting insights. Founders start revealing things to you that you would not necessarily see in articles and in podcasts and in fireside chats. And you realize, my goodness, these guys look like they're doing really well on the outside, but they've also sort of got the same existential questions as me as a founder, and they're struggling with exactly the same issues. And I think a huge part of it is realizing, essentially, eternally, constantly realizing it's not just me. This is the same for everyone.
So
yeah.
Do you try and not compare yourself to any other people and just focus on your own work? Is that your solution to that problem?
It's difficult to not be constantly sort of tantalized by, let's say, what you read in the news, right? You open TechCrunch, and as a young founder, you're still sort of working on your startup, bootstrapping it, and then you see this incredibly successful startup that just raised, or seemingly successful startup that just raised $300 million. So it's very difficult to not compare yourself. But some of the most impressive founders around me are indeed very good at creating a vacuum. They say, I in fact don't talk to many people these days. I don't read the news that much. I'm not that interested in other companies. We're just focused on our thing, and it's sort of a very sort of
binary,
Elon Musk-like first principles approach of, we're not going to sort of listen to all this advice out there, all these articles, all these Medium posts about how to live your life better, and I'm just going to focus on figuring things out for myself, and that seems like a much healthier approach, actually.
And then before we dive into a lightning round, I want to touch on one of your areas of expertise, and that's the consumer space. So what are your thoughts on successful consumer products? I mean, what are the commonalities in those products that makes them successful, do you think?
Well, I've actually had really good discussions with one of the companies that I invested in about this, the Mindy team. This is a bunch of French guys who are three out of four of them studied as art students, and they sort of have a very much of an artist approach to consumer products. And I think that we often agree that successful consumer products just have very, very little friction, and that when we're building something, suddenly sort of we're very much removed from reality. It's easy to remove yourself from reality and to overestimate the amount of complexity and the amount of friction that users will tolerate. These guys are just obsessed with building products that are just incredibly simple to use. One big action. I mean, if you look at, if you look at Uber, if you look at Instagram, if you look at Snapchat and all these things, just very, very few actions. And immediately you get a tremendous reward, sort of this magical moment that happens. It's about trying to find something that people fundamentally, viscerally want, that has not been done in that way before, and then trying to reduce it to the most simple action possible, which is incredibly difficult, and which at the beginning can look sometimes very stupid.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And do you apply that to the onboarding process then? Where you mentioned Uber, Snapchat, Instagram. Do you apply that to the likes of Mindy and your views towards consumer startups?
Very much. I think that, again, I think that it's very funny how everyone is sort of a schizophrenic person to some extent. As a user, we're all very lazy. We're all in it kind of for ourselves. When we order food, and we have to fill out this new form with our billing address and our credit card, so we get incredibly irritated. But then when we're building our product, so we assume, of course people want to do this 10-step sign process and enter all their information, and you suddenly sort of forget you sort of hide the truth from yourself, and you forget exactly what you felt as a customer. So I think that a lot of these very good product people that I've spoken with are fine with skipping steps that most people include in their onboarding process or in their product by default because everyone else is doing it. So I think that one of the biggest challenges as an investor and as a founder is that you can end up doing things because other people are doing them. I think that very few people make up their mind for themselves. And so again, this idea of working from first principles as a founder and as an investor, making up your own rules and sort of being creative enough and bold enough to remix and to say, you know what, maybe I don't need to, why do I need to log in? Do I need to log in for this app? You try Yik Yak, and you don't actually need to log in when you onboard. I think that's very difficult, but it's part of building something new and successful.
And I'd love to dive into a quick fire round now. So I say a short statement, and you hit me your immediate thoughts.
Sure.
So, what's the hardest thing about being an angel?
I think the hardest thing is, I was telling you that I I love surrounding myself with incredibly smart and ambitious, hardworking people, and I want to invest in a lot of them, or at least I want to talk to a lot of them. And of course, I can't invest in most of these people. And so actually being able to pass on an investment while maintaining a relationship with someone who you like, and just not necessarily just investing because you're friends, is very difficult. It's sort of a very, you have to be very tactful, and it's very messy.
And then your favorite book and why?
I'm a huge fan of fiction. Very rarely read nonfiction or sort of online medium articles and all that. So I would say I love Hermann Hesse, Narcissus and Goldman, Siddhartha. I love Tolstoy, Anna Karenina. I
love Anna Karenina.
Love Kurt Vonnegut. I think that, by the way, reading things like Cat's Cradle or Slaughterhouse-Five and all these books that take an incredibly zoomed out view on sort of the human condition and human experience makes you sort of much more mature and much wiser about all these little daily problems that we get caught up in our work as founders and as investors, or as just people in the workforce. It's great to just be able to escape as well. I think that especially in the U.S., as someone who grew up in France, people are just constantly boasting about how hard they work, no matter where they work, how many hours they put in. And of course, that's not really what matters the most. It's sort of not necessarily the most insightful work most of the time, and can be low quality because you're very tired. Being able to escape also in sort of another world and other realms, and being able to travel through these other lives in these books is very relaxing, very, very refreshing.
And then what founder do you most respect or admire?
There are a few founders and entrepreneurs who I just think are incredible. I'll give you two. I think one of them is has become kind of a cliche, but I think that Travis Kalanick is very, very impressive simply because of his perseverance and his ability to just execute and roll out incredibly ambitious plans. I just love people who are hyper-focused and who will sort of make something happen no matter what. And then a totally different non-tech space. I very much admire, although I don't know him, Brunello Cucinelli. I don't know if you know who that is.
No, I don't.
He's the founder of Brunello Cucinelli, the luxury cashmere brand. And you see these in London, you see it in London, you see it in San Francisco, everywhere. He's built an incredible cashmere brand, making some of the most beautiful clothes in the world. And I would encourage you to read up. There's an incredible New Yorker profile about him. He grew up in this little village in Italy, Solomeo, which I think had only 800 inhabitants. And instead of sort of leaving and seeking opportunity elsewhere, he stayed there and today employs everyone in the village. I think it's now 1,200 people, has built an incredible theater there that attracts people from all over the region. Employees are just having terrific working conditions. They all have, prosciutto for lunch in San Pellegrino, and they just make the most beautiful clothing. And if you go on his websites, you'll see just quotes from Dostoevsky, and you'll see he has a bust of, I think, Obama and Socrates in his office. Just a fascinating Renaissance man who lives in a very sort of humble house. Just incredible character.
And then finally, your most recent investment and why you said yes.
The most recent one that I can talk about is this company called Ring Around, which is soon going to rebrand, actually. And they do, if you know Teespring, they're like
Yes,
Teespring.
Absolutely, yeah, Teespring.
They're like Teespring for jewelry. So they make custom jewelry very, very quickly.
Was that not Brooklyn Bridge too?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I discovered that opportunity thanks to Charlie and Ryan from Bassett. Ring Around, they're already doing quite well on a monthly basis, and the founder, Eric, if you meet him, is just an incredibly hardworking person, a hustler, a charmer, is able to recruit the best people. So it was very much founder based, and also based on the quality of the recommendation from Ryan and Charlie.
Well, Edward, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I've hugely enjoyed chatting with you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Harry. Same here.
Again, a huge thank you to Edward for giving up his time today to come on Angel Insights. It was absolutely fantastic to hear his perspective as a young angel entering the angel investing world and partnering with some of the best angels in New York. And for today's accompanying article from Edward, then head on over to the SyndicateRoom Investor Academy at SyndicateRoom.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at SyndicateRoom to never miss an episode or update. And we'd absolutely love to hear your feedback too, so you tweet us on at SyndicateRoom for for that also. Thank you so much, and we look so forward to bringing you next week's episode. Finally, before we leave, we'd like to remind you that early stage investing is risky, therefore please make sure that you do engage in the proper due diligence prior to making the investment. Thank you so much.